to users and it can give voice to the community. And that's something that we all need. But then in terms of public goods funding, I feel that we are moving towards the right direction. One great example is the Atom Economic Zone Quarterly funding that we have right now with Dora and the Atom Accelerator. And it's a topic that maybe we haven't been talking about much. And I'm really happy that we have this panel today. So this is going to be community governance and public goods funding. And the moderator is Vanessa from Electric Gems. Welcome.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Do I invite them all up as well, Nina? Okay, come on up, guys, come on up. We have Othman, Jordan, Adair, and Brian. I'm Vanessa Pestritto. Good morning.
Hello.
Bonjour, buenos dias. I'm Vanessa Pestritto of Electric Gems. And, let's make sure we, okay. So when you tweet, you put them in order as what they want. Okay. I'm currently strategy lead at Flare Network. And just for some background, the Community Governance Panel on Public Goods Funding is a nice topic close to things that we can all relate to. As I've worked at a Layer 1 pre-token, and I've made venture investments, and I've also provided funding for public goods and received funding for public goods. So we have an exciting discussion up ahead, and I'd like to invite my panelists to introduce themselves with their role, company, a one-liner of what it is, and how long you've been there, and anything else you see relevant. Oh, cualquiera.
Hello, everyone. I'm Othman. I'm the protocol specialist at Chainflow. Chainflow is a validator, a boutique validator. We've been in the Cosmos ecosystem prior to Genesis, and we mainly focus on decentralization, governance, and empowering the smaller independent validators within the crypto blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jordan Andrews from Atom Accelerator. I'm the venture investments lead. I also help out with ecosystem growth. And as we're a small organization, we wear a lot of hats. So basically, think of us as the public grants and venture funding arm of the Cosmos Hub, while also helping stimulate ecosystem growth for Atom Economic Zone and Cosmos Hub.
Hey everyone, my name is Brian. I'm a core contributor to Dora Factory and Dora Hacks. Dora Hacks, for those of you who don't know, is one of the largest multi-chain developer incentive platforms. We work a lot in Cosmos to help ecosystems host hackathons, grant programs, and other types of funding opportunities for early stage developers and early stage projects. And Dora Factory is a protocol that develops on-chain governance toolings for decentralized community governance and helps, basically decentralize a lot of the funding streams that occur on the Dora Hacks platform.
Hi everyone, my name is Adair Kelley and I'm co-founder of Abstract Money. So for developers, we build infrastructure and tooling for chain abstracted protocols and chains. But the users don't care about that. So we're packaging all of that magic tech in the background and abstracting it, hence abstract, and creating an interchain app platform, or what you might call an app store.
Wonderful, thank you. So let's start with community governance. People know what it is generally, feel free to define it, but I think we would like to start with, what advice would you give to a new staker or validator? Basically, what would you have liked to have known when you got started and what you've learned now?
I can take this one first. I believe that, something that new stakers should get well versed in is really aligning themselves with validators that can speak for them and share the same values as them within whichever ecosystem they're a part of, because they do have a lot of pull on these networks. And you as the delegator can also vote with your stake, and these validators, especially the smaller ones, will listen to you. So making sure you interact with these validators, because at the end of the day, they hold your capital as well. You can demand things from them, So it's important to make sure you're well aligned and constantly communicating and interacting with your validators.
I think one thing I'd say, I know obviously this is Nebular Summit, so I'm sure the vast majority of people here are familiar with Cosmos ecosystem, but for anyone that doesn't know, one really interesting piece of Cosmos governance is that as an individual staker, you can still vote, even if the validator you've delegated to votes a different way. So I would highly encourage anyone that is interested in being active in governance to do so, and always be voting, even if, not just like, sit back and let whatever validator you're delegated to vote, with the entire voting power of their stake. If you feel like you want to vote specifically for something, you can, which is a pretty interesting piece of technology in Cosmos. And then, my advice to stakers is probably actually just diversify the amount of validators you're staking to. I think that's probably the safest thing to do. If you have a large bag of one token you want to stake, you should probably distribute that stake across a very wide number of validators from just a risk management perspective. So yeah, I don't know how many people do that, or they just stake everything to one validator, but that'd be my advice.
And I'd actually like to hop on what Brian just said. I think that we really need more validator collections. We need more customized or collections of validators that people can delegate to. Like the developers in the space probably know best which validators are running the best tech or going to have the best uptime. And then there might be other community members that would be able to collect the validators that have the best takes in the space, who are the most outspoken, and put them into little collections that users can stake to that splits that stake amongst those validators. And I think that's really important to distribute the stake amongst multiple members.
Yeah, to add on to that, what I think is really interesting with Cosmos is kind of like what I think Brian was saying was, you're allowed to overwrite the vote, or not necessarily overwrite, but I guess if you don't vote, the validators that you're staking to, that you're delegating your stake to, they can vote on your behalf, but you don't have to let your vote be up to the validator. You can be involved in governance, post in the forums, post on, I guess, social media platforms like Twitter, for example, voice your concerns or maybe pros and cons of what this governance decision may entail. And that actually holds a lot of weight in the sense of you're publicizing, you're socializing what may happen with this certain governance vote. But I also think it's important to be able to communicate with the community. This goes for stakers, this goes for delegators, validators, to be able to go ahead and communicate as a collective community, hey, what's going to be best for this ecosystem moving forward? That goes for Cosmos, that goes for Cosmos Hub, that goes for any Cosmos chain, or even beyond. As we see governance across all of Web3, it's really important to be an active ecosystem community member, but as well as with Atom Accelerator, we want to be an active community steward and ecosystem steward. And so we do our best, and maybe I'm front running, hopefully I'm not, but we want to do our best to give our best advice on what ecosystem growth could look like for Cosmos Hub and Atom. And so that entails working with validators, working with the community, and communicating what we believe may be the best option for the current governance proposal at hand.
So a lot of good information here, especially in the Cosmos space. You can vote as an individual. People have trouble understanding how to diligence some validators. So it's helpful to know that you guys are talking about this, having this discourse with token holders. Are there any best practices or ways that you could give examples of nurturing that community of delegators, either from the validator side or Atom Accelerator side? I'm curious to know what you guys do beyond just saying, hey, reach out. What are some examples that you've seen with those that stake with you?
So on top of, encouraging your delegators to vote if they don't agree with you, it's important to maintain constant communication on Twitter, on your Discord, or your community Telegram, about several updates if you're shutting down your validator, if you're changing your commission rate, if I was speaking to post-human validator, if there was a proposal he would like to abstain on, he would mention to his community, hey, we're abstaining. So if you would like to vote, that's when you signal your delegators, because at the end of the day, we do know that there is some sort of voter apathy. So you can't really expect the delegators to be always on top of it. So I think that's a good practice of encouraging them to make their own choices, but also
Is that a challenge sometimes?
it definitely is from the validator perspective, because we're not only taking care of governance, but running nodes, also creating public goods, other aspects of just the validator business outside of just voting have to be taken care of as well. So it is when the team is small.
There's a pretty interesting dichotomy with what you just mentioned, Othman, which is like, on one hand, validators, like oftentimes are very transparent with the community, saying, hey, we voted yes on this proposal, here's why. Hey, we voted no on this proposal, here's why. But on the other, like the other side of that, I actually was just reminded of when you mentioned, like, oh, we're abstaining on this proposal, and here's why. And that's actually something that maybe is somewhat related to voter apathy in Cosmos. There's probably many governance proposals where validators, for political reasons or reputation reasons, despite maybe actually having a yes or a no opinion, will just vote abstain to not upset anybody. So I think on the one hand, you've got like a lot of importance with validator transparency in how they're voting, because the community needs to be informed about like which validators they are aligned with. But on the other hand, if you're able to introduce more private voting into governance, then you'll probably have a lot more voter turnout and a lot more clear decisions and a lot less validators voting abstain, I would imagine.
I have a quick follow-up
Okay.
question. Is that okay?
Quick, and then we're going to go to public goods.
How do you hold how could you hold the validators accountable once private voting is introduced?
Yeah, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and I think you, at that point, would place a larger emphasis on individual voting. But maybe validators are form closer ties with their communities in general, right? And there's obviously some way they are able to share the way they're voted, but it's not something that's telegraphed super publicly, for other private or reputational reasons.
I'm going to move on to public goods funding. So everyone in Cosmos, I feel, is very aware of public goods and how important they are, but sometimes it's a challenge in getting them to be sustainable public goods. So I want to start with somebody who's been applying for funding, and then we'll go to the funder. So Adair, can you give us your perspective on your experience in seeking funding for public goods?
Sure, thanks. So 2 years ago, we started Abstract, I guess a little bit over 2 years ago now, as a chain-agnostic framework for developing applications modularly. The idea was to allow multiple teams to collaborate in bringing these apps to reality so that we wouldn't waste time integrating new services or building the same components that have already been built. And the thing here is it's like CosmWasm. It's completely chain agnostic. It works everywhere. We wanted to make it so developers, they could build an app on one chain and bring it to all these other chains because, it's decentralized ecosystem. You should be able to bring your apps where it wants. We applied to every single grants program in Cosmos. At the time, it was over 2 years ago, so there was Terra, there was Juno, and Osmosis, and then there's a couple other ones that popping up here and there. Not one of them, all of them expressed interest in this. They were like, oh yeah, this is going to benefit everyone. More apps, more users, and more people on our chain. But not one of them wanted to fund us directly because we benefit everyone else. And that's the problem with public goods funding, is in Cosmos, the organization that must not be named was not funding CosmWasm at the time. And so we, as a CosmWasm framework and infrastructure, we're not going to get funding from them. And there was no place for protocols not protocols, but tooling, public goods tooling that worked everywhere could get funded. Every chain wants to be special, and it makes sense as a business, but as an ecosystem, it doesn't. So we really struggled, and that pushed us to look into venture funding, and here we are today. So it all turned out fine. Though it pushed the, I guess it pushed the ownership more into the private sector rather than the public sector, where we'd rather have had it in the beginning. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. And Jordan, can you give us an example of an appropriately funded and successful public good? It doesn't have to be one that you funded. It could be one that you've just observed, or you can say something great you did too. Either way.
Could I actually go back to the previous question? Because
Oh, yeah.
I'm on the venture side, so I'm not like necessarily the expert on the grants and public goods side.
Oh, okay.
We actually work with Dora Hacks, and so we helped, I believe we funded, and Brian could speak more on this, of course. We helped fund Dora Hacks for the quadratic funding program. I think part of it came from the community pool, is that correct? And then part of it came from our grant funding program. And together we were able to have the community actually be directly involved in public goods funding. So I believe and Brian, again, can go over more on this because this is their platform. But the community can actually actively be involved, similar to governance in a way, but you vote and donate, I believe, Adam, in the AEZ quadratic funding round. And so teams or people working on different types of public goods, they can go ahead and post whatever they're working on, and if the community believes like, oh, this is a really good initiative, they can vote with their dollars, they can, go ahead and I believe Dora Hacks matches some of that amount. And I think that's huge because that's, now the community is actually having they're being an active participant in voting and donating to what they believe that they want for the ecosystem. Aside from that, I think like a good way to look at public goods is and ecosystem growth for blockchains is that a lot of them are like I like to liken them to like cities or countries, right? In the sense of urban planning, right? You need public goods such as roads, sidewalks, access to healthcare, access to education, because these things, they may not do as well, and maybe some people will debate on this, but they may not do as well if they were privatized or monetized, just because these are things that everyone benefits from and everyone needs. And in the same way, in the Cosmos ecosystem or in any blockchain, any Web3 ecosystem, you need some of these public goods, such as access to dev tooling, dev education, a lot of other things to enable proper ecosystem growth. And within that ecosystem growth, you need growth for users and developers to sustain, a really active ecosystem if you want to really grow it and make it attractive for people to use and interact with. In the same way that cities, you need businesses and citizens, and you have to sort of balance that between the two. So I think public goods is extremely important, and Brian can maybe establish, educate more on what he's...
That's awesome. Thank you so much for the example of city public goods. Brian, is there anything that you think is first, the funding example was good. Anything for sustainable public goods?
Yeah.
Sorry, how they can be sustainable.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to bring this full circle. So what Adair talks about is like a very common story about like struggling, because it's particularly in Cosmos, because like, let's face it, like interchain go-to-market is actually not very sexy. And that's because someone like Abstract is like not necessarily hitching themselves to a particular ecosystem. So as they're fundraising, they're not like, oh, we're like a core ecosystem project of this chain. The foundation supports us, right? We're getting bankrolled. Like, that's gonna really help us with our distribution. So it's like hard for them to it's hard for a lot of funds to like get FOMO'd, right? Like if someone's like a new hot project and some like, really cool ecosystem, like they can raise funding very, very easily. But when you're saying, oh, I'm taking a pure multi-chain go-to-market, I'm, going into the interchain, you're a little more agnostic of a platform. It's much harder to get funding, particularly because there's no like central body of authority in Cosmos 2 that is specifically bankrolling those projects. So what they do then is say, okay, well, let me just try to go get some grants, and kind of the same thing happens, right? Like everyone likes their project, but those chains only want to give a grant to projects that are basically going to, once again, like dedicate themselves to your ecosystem, right? Because a grant program doesn't want to give money to a project and then that project doesn't ultimately like deploy or prioritize that ecosystem. And then the other difficulty that a lot of projects seeking grant funding have is that grant programs themselves are actually highly selective. For example, like AADAO, right? Like what do you guys have, like about $9 million or something like that, or a $5 million fund? Like that's not very big, right? So grant programs like can't miss. It's a big problem if they miss. So oftentimes some of the earliest stage projects, or if it's just an MVP or just an idea, like they're not actually getting much interest from grant programs. So you need some other form of like very sustainable, more experimental pools of capital that can, be dedicated to fund, very good developers in particular ecosystems whenever they want to start a new project, or maybe there's an existing public good in the ecosystem that's not commercialized in any particular manner. It doesn't have a business model. It's not producing revenue on its own, but it's this open source, community infrastructure that's important for the ecosystem. And those types of projects need funding as well. But it's not a venture target. It's not a grant target because there's no ROI on funding them, or at least direct ROI. So a great way to solve this problem is to actually turn it over to the community. The community is going to be benefiting directly from new projects coming into the ecosystem, public goods that service the ecosystem, and from a very altruistic perspective, they can potentially donate, almost like in a form of charity, to some of the most promising projects in the ecosystem, or at least set up some type of community fund to fund really early stage projects whenever a developer or a hacker even wants to build or try something new. So there's different types of funding mechanisms that you can put in place. Jordan mentioned quadratic funding, which they're doing with us as a way to help accelerate and supplement these types of community decisions. But ultimately, the community oftentimes can fill the gaps in the market where the existing programs can't service.
Do you think that the longer term solution then for funding public goods is engaging with the community in this way?
Yeah, absolutely.
The rough parallel, and I hope someone can help me think of a better one, is giving a paycheck to, a piece of your paycheck to the public good, like 10% or something, which is related to other institutions that do that. But I'm curious just what you guys think, because it's tough, because a lot of the community is developers versus end users that don't know about the underlying infrastructure needs. So when you say community, do you mean developers that understand it and will be using it, or just all the way up to the end users, any token holder?
I think, I mean token holders, basically. Yeah. Because that also incentivizes the foundation to grow their token holder community as well. And also incentivize them to move most governance on chain and encourage them to vote. So I think ultimately there's a lot of alignment there between foundation actors, retail developer actors, all together to grow their basically token holder base and widen the distribution of token holders as well.
Okay, and for those looking for funding for public goods, either on the venture side or grant side, what do you guys recommend in terms of traction or evidence that they can even qualify to be considered for funding that you'd recommend for them to be prepared with, right? Not just an idea.
Sure.
So what's the?
Yeah. Well, I think it's an evolving definition. From our perspective, we usually try to make public goods funding rounds very iterative, based on community feedback. So I think the requirements for what classifies as a public good can change long term based on what makes the most sense for any particular ecosystem and their community. But I think some very simple requirements that most people would agree with are things like it needs to be open source, it can't be commercialized, it can't have any discernible business model, and if it does develop a business model in the future, maybe they can graduate from the public goods program and actually pay it back to the program that got them started in the future. They probably should have some type of cap on venture or grant funding, right? Because there's probably some very early stage projects that while they aren't commercialized yet, they certainly plan to, and they've already raised a substantial amount of money from either venture funding or grant funding, and maybe the community's money should go to something a little bit more deserving, less well-serviced at that point. So I think those are kind of the main criteria, but there can certainly be more, and I'm certainly happy to even discuss any of those in particular if the community feels differently.
And yourself, Jordan, any sort of other traction that you look for?
I would say that public goods funding is quite complex, and that is why we funded Dora Hacks, to take advantage of the quadratic funding and enable the community to have their place and their voice to be able to, one, donate, but also get their funds matched with Dora Hacks and ourselves. And that way we're now funding goods that the community is wanting, as opposed to, we have our grants program, and that's not necessarily public goods specific. And so anything public goods, we refer teams over to Dora Hacks for their quadratic funding rounds, because it is quite complex. If we were to pick and choose and give grants for public goods, it can be sometimes a controversial topic as what teams are getting public goods. And I think Abstract, they were talking about how challenging it was when they were going to all these different ecosystems. They were all interested, however, because it didn't benefit one specific ecosystem, there was a challenge as it doesn't always fit the mandate for giving an ecosystem grant always. And that's where public goods comes in, and Dora hacks quadratic funding.
Great. And I know, Othman, you mentioned that you guys do contribute some public goods as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so just in our last 30 seconds, if you and Adair, can you just give advice to those that are building public goods, anything that you'd like to share with the audience for your efforts in doing what you do?
Public goods can span across a wide range of things, but us specifically, we have a knowledge commons called the Staking Defense League, where we take in smaller independent validators that are trying to learn how to, start up. And that's basically a place where you can share knowledge, learn how to do the business side of validating. If there's not enough capital amongst us, we get together and set up a validator together on a certain network, XYZ. But that's just a small example of like things you can do besides, just building software and whatnot as public goods.
Great, thank you. Adair, any quick advice for
Yeah, real
public
quick
goods
advice. Two things. One, make sure people know about it. Make sure that you're talking about it. Make sure that other developers are aware of your public goods. That's something that we struggled with a little bit. Second one, apply to the Dora Hacks public goods funding program. They are amazing. It's been a wonderful experience with them. We really appreciate the community support, and it's, woo, go Interchain.
Abstract also has a demo live right now, right? That everyone can go check out with Abstract accounts.
Oh, yes. Zion.abstract.money. That's oh my gosh.
Xion.
Xion.abstract.money. Experience chain abstraction live between Zion and Neutron with more ecosystems coming soon.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. It was really nice coordinating, and have a good one. Oh, yep, she wants to take a picture. Oh, okay.